Robert Risby is the Vice President and past Chair of the Board of Directors of the Vitae Foundation. The Foundation is a nonprofit educational organization focused on creating a culture of life by using research-based messaging and cutting-edge media to inform women facing an ultimate pregnancy about local pregnancy help centers, educating the public about the value and sanctity of human life, and restoring the value of life as a core belief in the American culture. Rob has served on the board of directors for numerous nonprofit organizations. He previously worked as an associate with wealth management advisor for a $100 million plus investment firm. He is a retired Air Force colonel and a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy. He was recently hired as the president of St. Mary's High School in Colorado Springs. Rob and his wife Michelle were both born and raised in South Dakota, and they are blessed to be the parents of 6 passionately pro-life children. Colonel, welcome.
So it seems like every time I address a convention, I'm always right before lunch or right before dinner. This time I'm right before a cash bar. So I'm very excited about that. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I appreciate that so much. I want to thank all of you for being here. To be a pro-life Democrat can be challenging. There are people within the Democratic Party that would have you silenced. There are people within the Republican Party who would have you silenced. And I've been on both sides of that. I'm an unaffiliated guy, and so my friends that are Democrats and Republicans both take me to task, so I think I can relate to what some of you have probably been through. The good news with that, many years ago, a guy you've probably heard of named Albert Einstein said something to the effect that he who marches to the rank and file has earned my contempt, because he has been given a large brain when a spinal cord would suffice. So thank you for having a large brain and using it. Also, another great man, Viktor Frankl, who wrote a tremendous book, Man's Search for Meaning. He also said something very similar. He said, everything can be taken away from us except our ability to choose our own way. So I appreciate the way that you've chosen, and I appreciate being with you today. So I represent the Vitae Foundation. As the introduction said, it's interesting. Until 3 weeks ago, I was the president and CEO at Vitae. And then I stepped down from that role to accept the position of a Catholic high school in Colorado Springs. And the reason I did that is when Vitae hired me 3 years ago, they told me they needed me to come in for about 3 months as an interim and help them navigate through some things. That turned into 3 years, and in that process, we'll talk a little bit about this, I had a wife battle cancer. I had a 5-year-old daughter diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and so with tremendous regret, I stepped away from Vitae because I was commuting from Colorado Springs to Missouri, which is about 700 miles, and took an opportunity to get back to my family. Vitae is in very good hands. The gal that replaced me, Debbie Stokes, is a tremendous leader, and she was gracious enough to allow me to give this presentation on her behalf. So, all right, next slide. Okay, so super, I tried to think of the longest and most cumbersome title I could come up with, and I think that's a success right there. The reason I want to just put this slide up there is Dr. Jeff Pauls, who is our Director of Research and Education. Obviously, if you send an email to Vitae, you won't get me anymore. If you send an email to Dr. Jeff Pauls, he is the guy responsible for the information I'm going to present to you today. He and our founder, Carl Landwehr, just tremendous men. They know as much about research into abortion decision making as any two people in the world. And we've got some facts and figures to back that up a little bit. Next slide. So here's what we're going to talk about, something you already know. How bad is the issue? What does Vitae do? What is right brain research? What have we learned from that? And then I want to give you just a couple of so what's at the very end, the obvious, the dilemma, and the takeaway. Next slide. You're going to know these things, right? So close to 3,000 abortions a day. I want to call your attention. Most of those abortions performed on women in their 20s. 93% of those abortions performed with women that have no relationship with the person who's doing the abortion. That's really important because this woman is making this decision in a vacuum most of the time. She does not know what she's getting into, and that's a really important finding from our research that we're going to talk about in some depth. Next slide. These are the numbers. Most of you probably know this. I put that malnutrition slide up there because I can't remember the last time I heard of someone starving to death in the United States of America. The World Health Organization thinks 2,000 of us are dying from starvation. If that's true, that would be a tragedy. That would be awful. Diabetes kills 80,000 people in the United States of America. I have a 6-year-old daughter, who has diabetes. That number leaps off the page to me, personally. But then as we move down the row, that number of 900,000 abortions is low. That's what the CDC reports. Not every state reports their numbers to the CDC. What we really have is abortion kills almost as many people as the 2 leading causes of death, heart disease and cancer, combined. It's a huge, huge issue. Lots of ways to tackle that. The gals from And Then There Were None, Abby's awesome. They are taking a really great tact, right? If we want to convince people to leave that industry, we have to have a place for them to go. We have elected officials that need to change laws and do those things. We need to do inspections. What Vitae's focus is, how do we reach that woman who is about to add a number to that 900,000 number and convince her to do something different? That's what our research is focused on. Next slide. So what does Vitae do? Research. You're going to hear me use the word research. I'll be careful. I probably won't inundate you with it, but we talk about research all the time. The reason we do that is nothing that we do at Vitae is based on our opinion, based on the things that we think would work. We've spent millions of dollars figuring out what actually works. Most of the things that we've learned, I don't like. They appall me, but they're true because the research shows it. Over the last 25 years, Vitae has developed the world's largest knowledge base on abortion decision making. Why is that important? Because we want to cut the thread before she makes the decision. We need to get in front of her before she makes the abortion decision. The way we do that, all of you know this, but the reason I called your attention to that number of 59% of the abortions performed on women in their 20s, those women live in the digital world. They live on their phones, they live on their computers, they live in their devices. That's where we reach them. What we do is we take that research, the things that we've learned, and we turn that into digital marketing strategies. We build websites, we do search engine optimization, we do digital search campaigns, social media. We find her when she's in the now moment. Because what does she do? I'm pregnant. Now what? She picks up her phone. And she puts something in that phone. How do I get an abortion? I'm pregnant, what do I do? Where can I get help if I'm pregnant? And we intercept her and we get in front of her before Planned Parenthood, before the abortion industry does. How do we know that? Well, when we use Google as an example, Google tells us, right? If you've done any of those Google search campaigns, you get statistics back. And the reality is, in every market that we're in, every place we go to try to reach a woman who is in that now moment in abortion, what happens when she searches for an abortion is a pregnancy center will pop up on her phone in the first or second place, and we drive Planned Parenthood or the abortion industry providers further down in their search results. The statistics say that 99% of the time when you search for something, you're going to click on one of the first 2 returns. So if we can get a pregnancy center to show up on her phone before Planned Parenthood does, 99% of the time, she's going to look at that pregnancy center before she looks at Planned Parenthood. That's huge because if you know anything about pregnancy centers, you know if she walks in there, if we can get her to the door of the pregnancy center, the great majority of the time she's going to make a life-affirming decision. If instead she ends up at Planned Parenthood, the great majority of the time she's going to abort. That's it. That's what we do. So we want to guide her to a pregnancy center instead of an abortion facility. Next slide. So right brain research. Why do we care about right brain research? Well, our founder, Carl Landwehr, asked this really unpopular question 26 years ago. He gathered the original supporters of Vitae. It was 30 people in the backyard of a couple that were friends of his in Jefferson City, Missouri. And he stood up in front of them and said, if life was a product, how would you market it? And people gasped. I mean, it's just almost gross to think about that, about marketing life. But here's the reality. We live in a consumer-driven world. So what do we do to get in front of that consumer? Because make no doubt about it, when a woman makes a decision for abortion, there is a consumer emotional element in that. It is not a statistical decision. It is a profoundly emotional decision. So what Carl Landwehr, our founder, did was he engaged with a man named Dr. Charles Kinney. Dr. Charles Kinney is the originator of right brain research. He invented the science 40 years ago. Is Dr. Kenny any good? Well, Dr. Kenny, you don't know him. Probably no one in here has ever heard of him. He's done marketing work for 250 of the Fortune 500 companies. You know some of the things that he's worked on. When Harley Davidson was about ready to go bankrupt many years ago, they engaged Dr. Kenny and they said, help us save this thing. We're trying to sell this motorcycle, no one will buy it. It's loud, it breaks down a lot. Those of you that are Harley owners, you know what I'm talking about. And what Dr. Kenny did is he did a whole bunch of research and he went to them and said, you're not selling a motorcycle. What you're selling is freedom. That's what the American people want when they engage in this experience, this relationship with Harley Davidson. Dr. Kenny was a huge part responsible for saving the Chevy Corvette brand. So he's very talented, very skillful researcher, invented this form of science, and he's also very pro-life. So when we approached him 25 years ago and said, we need your help, he said, absolutely, I'll help. So, and it started with this question: if life was a product, how would you market it? Next slide. So what we do with that is we do consumer and emotional research. And this is what that looks like. So when we think of research, I mean, I'm a behavioral science person, so I think about statistical research and how many are doing this and what percentage is doing that. That's what we see in the pro-life movement constantly. You know, I just gave you one. 59% of women ages 20 to 29, that's where the abortions are taking place. What right brain research does is tap into the emotional reason why the decision is made. Left brain research says this many people made that decision. Right brain research says this is why they made that decision. Well, what does that look like? We get women who are volunteers, they're not volunteers, they volunteer themselves, but they're paid. So we go out there and we engage with marketing organizations that bring in people that meet a certain criteria. The last study we did, we needed women who had had an abortion at Planned Parenthood. Now when you get that specific in a target audience with research, it's very expensive. So we had to pay those women a lot of money to come in. They come into a room, it's quiet, they're videoed, they know they're going to be videoed, they wear a sleep mask, and what the researchers do is they, in a one-on-one setting, take them almost to a semi-hypnotic state. That's how the researchers talk about it. It's not hypnosis, but we take them to this profoundly relaxed state. And then through the repetition of questions and through the specific phrasing of questions that we spend months just writing the questions that we're going to ask them, we take them to a place where they can visualize a moment in time. And the place that we want them to visualize is the moment that they made the abortion decision. It's fascinating to watch these interviews because some of these women who have had their abortion 30 and 40 years earlier will recall the song that was on the radio in the car as they were driving to the facility, the color of the carpet in the waiting room, the first name of the person who did the intake. So we take them to this deeply profound place, and then we start to unpack why she made that decision. Next slide. Now, what's really important about that is what we found in all of these studies. Here are the 7 studies that we've done in the last 24 years. Those studies cost about $3 million. We found that the great majority of the time, the reason the woman made the decision is not the reason why culture and society thinks she made the decision. It's very different. And that's a very important thing for us to consider because most of the time we think that appealing to her left brain analytical side is what will work, right? Abortion is a moral wrong. You have a child living within you. The child will die. If you're a religious person, God will somehow judge you. None of those things are compelling to her. None. That's what every one of these studies has shown in different ways. We had different groups with different studies. Sometimes they were adolescents, sometimes they were young adults, sometimes they were the whole spectrum. But what we found over and over and over again, the things that we think will convince her not to have the abortion, not only don't convince her, but often reinforce her resolve to have the abortion. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take 800 pages of research, and I'm going to summarize that in one sentence from my friend Paul Swope, who worked for Vitae many years ago. Next slide. Paul wrote an article for First Things 20 years ago, and here's one sentence from that article. I hate reading my slides, but I'm going to read this to you because this is really important. This research suggests that modern American women of childbearing age do not view abortion, the abortion issue, within the same moral framework as those of us who are pro-life activists. The thing that is compelling to you and me that makes abortion wrong is not compelling to her. We've been talking to her the wrong way for decades. We have to change that. Okay, next slide. So why do we do the research? The reason we do the research is 3 reasons. Those of you that are researchers know this. There's 3 things we find in the research, things we already know. Often in research, something pops up and we say, we knew that. But what that does, the research gives us a place to plant our feet and say, this is why we know that. Tacit knowledge, things that we assumed were true, but we weren't sure. There's all kinds of things like that, that tacit knowledge, right? You know, what's an example of tacit knowledge? Well, my little girl that has diabetes, you know, I'm pretty sure she loves me, right? I really am. I mean, I kind of feel it. I'm not really sure. And then the other day I come home and I sit on the floor in the couch, and she comes over and sits on the couch behind me and she starts rubbing my neck. Okay, I know she loves me now, right? I mean, that's no longer tacit knowledge. Now I have some proof. Finally, the surprises. This is what we're really driving for in the research. What is new? What did we not know? That's why we do the research. So what does the research show us? What do we need to know and overcome? Next slide. I'm going to give you 5 on this slide, 11 key findings. They're all very simple, and I hope all of you go, well, that makes sense. You're not going to be shattered or shocked by anything you hear in here. You might, but I don't think so. These first 5, let me go through these fairly quickly because these are kind of how do we communicate with her. First thing, we have to have a positive message for her. If we wag our finger at her, we lose her. We're done. Automatically. I've gotten arguments. I've gotten in, I don't get heated, but I've gotten heated responses from people that protest outside of abortion facilities. And they will tell me, no, I yelled at this woman, I told her she was going to go to hell, and she made a life-affirming decision. I said, you know what? I believe you that happened. The other 100 women that encountered you did not make a life-affirming decision, and you reinforced their resolve. The incredibly well-intentioned people who are doing that, many of whom are friends of mine, do not like to hear that. That is a wildly unpopular thing to hear. Let me tell you how personal that is, just a side story. My roommate at the Air Force Academy, his mom was one of those awesome moms that was getting arrested in front of the abortion facilities back in the 70s and 80s. I love her, she's awesome. She knows it didn't work, right? It's not working. It doesn't work for her. It's not gonna work for her. It might work for a different reason. It might reinforce politicians' resolve. It might reinforce our resolve, but it does not help the abortion-determined women make a life-affirming decision. Viable option, she has to have some option. You heard Abby talk about this. She has to have something that's waiting for her other than just, I don't have an abortion. Self-preservation. Women feel like they're losing themselves in this process. I'm pregnant, I don't want to be pregnant, my life is over. We have to paint a path for them that says, you will not lose yourself by carrying to term. We have to give a hopeful message, and we know this. Any of you that work with young people today know this. You cannot be judgmental. To be judgmental is the worst thing you can be in our culture today. Don't judge me, right? How many times have we said that, seriously or in jest? Don't judge me. The abortion-determined woman will respond with anger to judgmental messages. That's just the way that it is. Next slide. Now let's unpack a few more. This one is probably, I hope this makes sense to you, but a lot of people don't understand this. What she's dealing with is an emotional death. Now, she's not worried when she's pregnant about her dying. That's not what she's worried about. She's worried about a psychological death. She believes that in the abortion decision, a death is going to take place. If she aborts, her child will die. Women know that. The abortion industry has been trying to tell us for years that it's not a baby, it's a clump of tissue. We know we're well beyond that. We have not heard a single woman in any of our research in 25 years say, well, I didn't know it was a child. I mean, let's think about that for a second. What do these women think happens when they're pregnant? Right? There's this blob of tissue inside me that's not a human, and then at some point it's human. Women do not believe that. So if she carries to term, though, if she aborts, her child dies. If she carries to term, she suffers a psychological death. That's what she's faced with. Something is going to die. That's critical. So the abortion decision is her saying this protects her from death. Now on the left brain side, we can't get that, right? Because she's not going to die, but that's not the way she's thinking. She's not thinking about dying from cancer, dying from an accident. She's thinking about the death of her emotional self. It is just as bad as if she was confronting cancer or a heart attack or anything else. That's how serious she takes this psychological death. Next slide. Me, here's the deal. It has to be about her. When you talk to an abortion-determined woman, when anyone talks to her and you make it about anything other than her, we've lost. We have to talk to her about her. You're going to hear me say that 20 times. She is more concerned with her life. We just talked about that emotional death. So to reach her, we have to speak to her needs. And I love that Abby says that, right? This is what women want. When they walk in, they don't want to be hit over the head at a pregnancy center with, you got to carry to term because God loves you, please don't kill your baby. Let's think about Colorado. We have legalized marijuana here. Our homelessness is skyrocketing. Drug abuse is skyrocketing. Illegal drug use is skyrocketing. She may be addicted to drugs. She may be homeless. She may be jobless. She may need education. Those are the things she wants to hear about. And in the pregnancy centers, particularly in this state, but most of the pregnancy centers across the country, when she walks in, they will ask her that question. Do you have a place to stay tonight? They didn't say, carry your baby to term because God loves you. Are you hungry? Do you have a substance abuse problem? Are you being abused at home? That's what she needs. We need to talk to her about her needs. If it's judgmental, she's going to walk away, and it will reinforce her resolve to have an abortion more times than not. Next slide. This one should be pretty obvious. She feels like she's not ready. I'm not ready to be a mom. This wasn't part of my plan. I wasn't wanting to be a mom now. I want to be a mom someday, but not today. So this has interrupted her natural flow of life. Right? I have 4 daughters. I have 2 sons, and I'm here to tell you I've got a sociology experiment going on in my house right now. Right? Because my sons are just kind of rolling through life like a steamroller. My daughters are planning life. They know what the boy they're going to marry looks like, right? They know what kind of car they're going to drive and what kind of yard they're going to have, right? Young women put these incredibly detailed plans together, and then she's pregnant. That wasn't in the plan. When I put that plan together when I was 7, I didn't say I was going to be pregnant at 19. That wasn't the way I had this planned out. So the abortion puts her life back to normal. That's how she views that. We know that's not true. It's absolutely not true, but that's what she's trying to do, is get back on that plan. And she feels like she has a right to that abortion to get herself back on track. Next slide. This is big, and I kind of spilled the beans already, the dream. So we already talked about that. She has this emotional blueprint. The pregnancy has got her off course. She needs to get back on course. The abortion is what provides that. Next slide. I hate equations. I'm a behavioral science guy, but here's the psychological equation. What do we do to get her to carry to term? What does she have to add up to carry to term? Her self-identity has to be preserved. I have to come out of this carry to term experience being the same person I was walking in. Now, I have 6 kids. I'm a lot different than I was before the first kid, but that's not the math we're doing here. She has to preserve her sense of who she is. She must have support of the influencers. Who's the number one influencer? It's not God, it's not her mom, it's not her dad, it's the father of the child. Now, let's think about winning that battle. One of the reasons I'm so worried about my sons is we have a toxic culture for young men in our culture today, right? It's just a disaster. We have a culture of males and not a culture of men. We have to help that father. And the good pregnancy centers in this country, they have just as many outreach programs for dads as they do for moms, because if dad will support her, then she might make the decision. And then finally, she has to get back on the plan. How can I get my life back in order? Right? And this is, Denver, I saw Marisol folks out there today. Denver's such a great example of what they've done at the Catholic Charities here. A woman can come into a pregnancy center here in Denver and say, I'm homeless, I'm jobless, I'm pregnant, what do I do? And Catholic Charities will walk with her for 18 years. They have got everything that she needs, from job placement programs, drug abuse treatment, daycare. If dad walks out and has a job, what happens when the baby's born? What's going to happen, right? She's got to have someone who can take care of that child so she can keep working. If we can put those 3 things together, she'll carry to term. Nowhere in there does it say browbeat her with the morality of this decision. And that hurts me because this is a moral issue. But I want to succeed more than I want to feel good about my own words. Next slide. Last key finding, choice. So if you've been paying attention, the Planned Parenthood industry, they've walked away from the word choice a little bit. They're talking about healthcare. They've been talking about healthcare for a couple of years. But choice is still a powerful word because these young women, if you're under 40, that's all you've heard for 40 years is choice, choice, choice. So it's really internalized in our young women today that this is their right, it's their choice. But here's the dilemma. All of these women that we have researched with have told us they had the abortion because why? They felt like they had no choice. So it's just this unbelievable dichotomy that's almost impossible to hold in balance, right? I'm having the abortion because it's my choice. I'm having the abortion because I feel like I have no choice. So they're torn between these unacceptable options. There's my one typo, I think. And often coercion is an issue. If you believe the studies, the majority of abortions are coerced. Let me tell you how bad this is. Let me tell you how deep this issue is when it comes to some of these women. One of the women, I wept when I watched this video. She said, I was raised Catholic, but when I became pregnant, I felt like I had no choice. I knew that I was going to go to hell if I had an abortion, but I had no choice. You know, and it's one of those things where it's research, right? But part of me wanted, why did we not walk in that room and say, you have been catechized improperly? You know, you need to talk to somebody about this because it isn't that way. Okay, next slide. Here's how she gets through that. Now, how does she do this? How many times have we in the pro-life movement said, how does she make that decision? How could she do that? That's a human life within her. Here's the 4 things she does to make that decision. She compartmentalizes. She puts that decision in a room, she closes the door and locks it, and never goes in that room, ever. That decision goes away. It's like it didn't happen. Now it's still churning in her subconscious, but consciously, she never, ever addresses it. She minimizes it. It's no big deal. I was 8 weeks pregnant. It was a blob of tissue. I read that in some article 20 years ago. It's just not a big deal. She justifies it. I have a right to do this. I can do this if I want because this is my body, this is my right. And then, finally she rationalizes it. I had no choice. My boyfriend was going to leave me. My parents were going to throw me out. I was going to have to drop out of school. I was going to lose my job. This is what she's going through. This is a deeply emotional thing. If we confront her with facts and figures and moral absolutes, we lose her. Next slide. Okay, so how do we overcome the obvious? She doesn't want to be preached at. She knows abortion is murder. Every one of these women that when we asked that in the questions over the 25 years, they said, I knew this was a baby. I knew what I was doing. She knows, but she puts it aside. She ignores it. So here's the deal. Needs loving guidance. One of the most compelling statistics that we've seen in any of the research that we've done or that we've partnered with is we had a study that said over 80% of these women, they said if one person had come alongside them and said, I will be there for you, I will support you, they would have carried to term. Think about that. 80% of abortions stop overnight because one person steps into that and says, I'm with you, I'll be here for you. If 80% of the abortions go away, the abortion industry goes out of business tomorrow. Next slide. Her dilemma, next. So, how can I carry to term? This is the question I'm asking, right? You, Rob, you're telling me I'm pregnant, and Rob's telling me I want you to carry to term. How can I do that next? Still become a mother next, and still live out my dream. How do I keep my life intact? That's her dilemma. That's it. Not the moral dilemma. It's not a political dilemma. It is a personal dilemma. How do I keep my life intact? That's her dilemma. Our dilemma is this. We're pro-life. Next slide. We want to tell her, choose life. Just make a life-affirming decision. And she's saying, but whose life? Right? Because if I carry to term, my life is over. I suffer this emotional death. So I love this choose life. I love it. It doesn't resonate with her. It doesn't. Whose life? It's her life. That's what she's going to tell us every time. Next slide. This is the last slide. So here's the eye chart. And I'm sorry, if you're in the back of the room and your eyes are like mine, you're probably having a tough time with that. If you don't remember anything I said today, if you don't remember my name, if you don't remember the color of the tie I was wearing, if you don't remember where this conference took place, if you remember nothing, remember the top line. We have to talk to her about her. That's it. That's it. And by the way, when we get asked to consult with politicians, with people who are running for re-election or running for election for the first time, and they say, how do I talk about this issue? That's what we tell them. Talk to her about her. This is about how can we take care of you. As soon as we turn it into this moral browbeating, which is honestly what I want to do, because this is a moral issue, we lose. If you want to win, talk to her about her. Almost as important, teach others to talk to her about her. Here's what that looks like. What does that look like, Rob? If I'm talking to her about her, I get that. She's pregnant, she doesn't want to be pregnant, and I can say, hey, let me take you to a pregnancy center. Hey, do you need a meal? Are you homeless? I can do that. But how do we talk to everybody around her? Well, here's the deal. Be conscious of who you're talking to and who you might be talking to. Let me give you an example. I've been working in the pro-life world for the last couple of years. I've been in pro-life boards for a long time. I get on an airplane. What happens when you're on an airplane? The person sitting next to you says, what do you do? And I turn and look at them and I say the same thing every time. Remember, you asked, right? And so we start talking about pro-life and abortion, and it gets deathly silent right around that chair. Well, the person I'm talking to in the aisle, in the middle seat, because I'm never in the middle seat, I'm on the aisle, right? So the person I'm talking to in that middle seat, I'm probably not actually talking to him or her. I'm probably talking to the person sitting in front of us. I'm probably talking to the woman across the aisle who may very well be post-abortive. So it isn't just about who you're talking to, it's about who's listening. Don't ever forget that. If you believe the statistics, and they're hard to get your head around, 1 out of 4 women in this country who is of childbearing age is post-abortive.
1 out of how many?
1 out of 4. Even if that, let me play a game with you. Even if that number is ridiculously inflated, let's just say it was 1 out of 10. It's not. Some people say 1 out of 3. I think 1 out of 4 is about right. Most of the studies say about 23% women childbearing age have had an abortion. She's around you all the time. And remember what's happened. It's in a room. She locked it away. She minimized it. She justified it. She rationalized it. But she can hear you. Please be aware that there are women around you who are post-abortive. Those women are the future of the pro-life movement because they're getting their voice and they're saying, this was not a moral good to me. This did not make my life better. And when we give them permission, when our culture gives them permission to speak up, they will help us change this tide. Because there are 60 million abortions. How many post-abortive women in this country? 30, 40 million? Right? It's a huge number. Those are the women. Talk to her even when you don't know she's there. I think I said that. Empower her. She's strong enough. We talked about that. Being a mom is a good thing, right? That's what pregnancy centers do. If you've never toured a pregnancy center, find the one nearest you and go and visit it, because that's where you're going to send her. We do events, Vitae did events all over the country. We'd ask people, these are pro-life people at a pro-life event, raise your hand if you know where your pregnancy center is, if you know the address. And it was about less than 5%. You got to know where to send her, because when she walks in and they do the pregnancy test and they say, you're pregnant, congratulations, you are a mom. And that's a beautiful thing. What do we do? What do we do when the teenage friend of our daughter says, I'm pregnant? We go, your parents are going to kill you, right? That's what we do. Instead, we say, wow, that's got to be a pretty big deal in your life. You're a mom. It's amazing. Now, let's talk about how we can take care of you. Let's talk to you about you and how we're going to take care of you. Be there for her in real ways. This is what we've encouraged those protesters outside of outside of abortion facilities to do. Instead of holding up a picture of what an aborted baby, please don't do that. If you do that, please don't. Do this. Do you need a job? Hold up a sign that says, do you need a job? Do you need a place to stay? Are you out of work? Are you trying to finish school? Those are things that will reach her. Now, let me talk out of both sides of my mouth. Protesters reinforce her resolve to have the abortion. People standing off to the side praying make a difference. People quietly praying outside of an abortion facility, not confronting, not attacking, actually, that does make a positive difference. Now, here's the tough one. Be there for her, even if she makes what we would say is a bad choice. This is what I love about pregnancy centers. Women come in, they get the pregnancy test. Pregnancy center says, you're a mom, you're pregnant. And she says, I'm going to have an abortion anyway. The good pregnancy centers, which is most of them, they say, we'll be here for you anyway. Right? If you have the abortion, please know we're here for you. Right? You have to be there for her even if she makes a bad choice. She knows it's wrong. That's not enough. We got to help her. This is my punchline, and I've said this everywhere across the country, and I get sick every time I say it. I hate to say this out loud. God loves you, please don't kill your baby is not compelling to her. I want that to be compelling to her, but here's the deal. If you want that to be compelling, help her, and then this is what happens almost every time in a pregnancy center. A woman makes a life-affirming decision. We help her. She gets a job. She gets drug treatment. At some point, what does she do? She says, why are you doing this for me? And then that person says, well, let me tell you about this guy named Jesus, if they're a Christian place. Okay? How am I doing on time? Because I'm done. So let me be not done for a second. Talk to her about her, okay? And this is a group of people that are trying to change the politics of this country. When you talk to those elected officials, those people running for office, tell them, particularly this group, right? Again, I'm neither party. The Republican Party has occupied the moral high ground of the pro-life movement, and they just assume that they own that high ground, right? We're pro-life, the end. That's as far as it goes. You have the ability now to have politicians say, hey, we're not talking about the legalities of abortion. We're not talking about laws that are going to get passed. I want to talk to her about her. I want to help her. The Democratic Party for decades has occupied that moral high ground. Please empower and encourage those Democratic politicians to reoccupy that moral high ground. That's an easy message for a Democrat. Well, there's no easy message in politics anymore. I take that back. There's an elected official in the back of the room, and he's like, dude, you're totally out of line there. It's an easier and simpler sell to say, hey, I'm here to talk to her about her. We want to help that mom. If she wants to carry to term, we want to be there for her. We've got the resources for her. Talk to her about her, encourage others to do the same. Next slide, now I'm done. VitaeFoundation.org. One of the things I forgot to tell you, Vitae is a nonprofit. So this isn't, Abby talked about, Planned Parenthood's a nonprofit and they got all this money. When I was running Vitae, that wasn't the case, right? I mean, so they're good people doing things on a shoestring. Go to the website, VitaeFoundation.org, read more about Vitae, read more about the research, and then if you need to reach out to somebody, if you have more detailed questions, Dr. Jeff Pauls, Jeff at VitaeFoundation.org, he is one of the most delightful human beings who has ever lived. He loves to talk about the research. If you get him on the phone, make sure you got a drink and some time, because he's going to want to get you smart in that research. All right, do we have questions, or are we over? Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
There's a person in my ministry who's completely convinced the aggressive approach is the right approach. Do you have materials I can show him otherwise?
Well, two things. One, Sidewalk Advocates for Life. We've partnered with them to do some of the training with them. They use our research. They're a great resource, and I don't know their website off the top of my head. I think it's their abbreviation. It might be SAFL.org, I think. Sidewalk Advocates for Life is a great resource for that. And really the question, if you didn't hear the question was, somebody is like, nope, the aggressive approach is the way we have to do it. There's only two. You got to make a decision when you're having a conversation with somebody like that. Are they going to listen? And I will ask people that. Like, okay, I have an opinion on that, Mr. or Miss who's telling me the aggressive approach will work. Are you interested in hearing it? Because sometimes they're just not. And if they're not, I mean, I'm a military guy, right? I mean, I will chase you down and I will tackle you and I will hold you down while I pour this knowledge into your head. I don't do that in those circumstances, because if they're not going to listen, all I'm going to do is offend them, and we're going to make it worse. So, but sometimes those people, sometimes, not all the time, they'll say, yeah, I'm interested, what do you have? Well, there's organizations that have done research, and years and decades of research that say the softer approach, the woman-centered approach, is really what works. Are you interested in having a conversation like that? Because if you are, I'll go to Vitae's website, I'll get some information off there, you and I can have a cup of coffee next week and have a reasonable conversation about this like adults. That's what I would do, and that's what I've done, so.
Regarding the person who thinks the aggressive approach is the right approach, it begs the question, what is it about this person that they're so wedded to their strategy? It may be a chance to listen to what's going on with them, and hear them non-judgmentally.
For sure.
They're from Poland, and they survived World War II.
No, and that makes sense, and I'll tie a bow on that. Yeah, you got to know where they're coming from. And the other thing to be very careful of, they're from Poland, they've been through World War II, they've been through horrific, I get that. For the typical person in this country, you got to be really careful, because sometimes those people that are very aggressive, they're post-abortive, or they've had an abortion experience. Even if it's a man, they've had an abortion experience. We need to tread cautiously, we need to hear them and walk with them, and not get aggressive back at them. So, yes, sir.
It seems to me a lot of women think they're going to be preached to when they go to a Christian-based pregnancy center, and that's a turn-off. Any thoughts?
Yep, and I can unpack that, because that's a great question. We hear that all the time. You know, there's these hardcore Bible-thumping Christians. I'm going to walk in there, I'm going to say I'm pregnant, and they're going to hit me over the head with the Bible. Now, I'm not saying that never happens, but I'll tell you, when I started at Vitae 3 years ago, we shared the research with about 100 pregnancy centers. The end of this year, it's going to be about 1,200. That's about half the pregnancy centers in the United States. We will not partner with you if you have some type of faith requirement for the woman who needs treatment, right? And can you still make
The battery may have run.
Yeah, the battery's dead. That's a sign you've talked too long. So what we tell them is, and you know, we had great conversations with here in Denver Catholic Charities, because Denver Catholic Charities, they said, hey, wait a minute, we're sponsoring these pregnancy centers. We're a Catholic organization. We want to present ourselves as Catholic. And our response was, it's okay to do that. Just don't do that when she's walking in the door. Let her come to you with that. So if you want to hang a crucifix in your lobby, that's fine. But when she comes in, talk to her about her, and then let her lead you to that faith question. And I'll tell you, in Colorado Springs, we have a pregnancy center that's really walking a good line there. Because if you come in and you need help, they'll give you that help. Then if you need something substantial, if you need diapers or formula or things like that after you've made a life-affirming decision, they'll do that. But you have to take a parenting class to do that. And then in the parenting class, they will introduce the idea of a faith walk. It's not a requirement. You know, they're not tying you to that. But they do it really well. Most pregnancy centers, that's the way they roll. Now, you'll find one, and somebody that is not pro-life will find one and go, see, there they are. And then my response is, the exception proves the rule. How can I say that? Well, I listened to this guy at a conference, and he said, this is how they roll. Heartbeat, CareNet, NIFLA, the organizations that are the consortiums of pregnancy centers, they are not saying hit these women over the head with Jesus when she walks in the door. Now, I don't like saying that, because that's kind of the point for these faith-based organizations, is they want her to have some relationship with God. But this is what they tell us, and this is what I tell other people. Jesus fed them, and he healed them, and then he talked to them about the relationship with God. And that's what the great majority of these pregnancy centers.
But a lot of women are not interested in listening to.
No, I see where you're going. And this one I'm super passionate about. The website. We do the digital marketing. If she goes to the website and there's a picture of Jesus on one side and a picture of a baby on the other side, she's not coming. Go to a pregnancy center website today. The great majority of them, they look like a health center. That's true. So yes, ma'am, you've been.
I had a conversation with a pro-choice woman who took in 2 women who were pregnant, with no place to go, and she was so frustrated because she couldn't find any of these health centers. And she's like, where are all these resources?
You know why she couldn't find it? Because they're not working with Vitae yet. So that's what we do.
Right.
That's what we do. We make them findable. Right? So that's the key is great volunteers, great staff members at these pregnancy centers. What they're not super skilled at and what they haven't spent $3 million on is research, figuring out how do we present ourselves to the world. So they've got to have a partnership with somebody like that. Vitae's not the only one. We've done the research, but we've got that. So, okay. I think we're done.